Welcome to Ghostmire, where every night a new horror story drags you deeper than the last. Before anything else, hit subscribe right now. If you miss even one night, you'll miss the piece that connects all these stories into something far darker. Comment below where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know exactly who's awake inside the dark with us, and listen carefully. This story has something hidden. A moment so disturbing, so unexpected that most people don't recognize it until the very end. If you leave early, you'll never know what really happened. So stay with me, all the way to the final second. Story 1, The Missing Mile. Vincent Kowalski prided himself on precision. In 17 years of long-haul trucking across the ice road from Yellowknife to the diamond mines, he'd never missed a delivery window or logged incorrect mileage. His Peterbilt 389 was equipped with 3 GPS systems, 2 dash cams, and a meticulous paper logbook where he recorded every kilometer. On March 3, 2021, Vincent departed Yellowknife at 6 a.m. with a load of mining equipment destined for the U.s.a. diamond mine, 440 kilometers north. The ice road was in excellent condition. Temperatures had held steady at -30 for 2 weeks, creating 60 centimeters of solid ice over Mackenzie Lake. Vincent had made this run 143 times. He knew every curve, every pressure ridge, every landmark. At kilometer 187, there was a distinctive red marker flag on the left side of the road. At kilometer 188, a small island with 3 dead trees was visible to the right. These landmarks had been there for 8 years. Vincent passed the red flag at 9:47 a.m. according to his dash clock. He glanced at his primary GPS. It read 187.2 kilometers from Yellowknife. His secondary GPS confirmed it. He made a note in his logbook, a habit from his early trucking days. The ice beneath his wheels was smooth, the visibility perfect. He could see for kilometers ahead. His speedometer held steady at 70 kilometers per hour. He looked up, expecting to see the 3-tree island within the next minute. But instead, he saw the red flag again, the same red flag he'd passed 1 minute ago. Vincent checked his GPS. It read 187.2 kilometers. Still, his speedometer showed he was moving at 70 kilometers per hour. He'd been driving for a minute. He should be at kilometer 188.3, but the GPS insisted he was at 187.2. Vincent felt a cold sensation that had nothing to do with the Arctic temperature. He kept driving, watching his odometer click forward. 1 kilometer passed according to his truck's internal measurement. The GPS didn't change. 187.2 kilometers. He passed the red flag again, and again, and again. He was trapped in a single kilometer of road. Vincent grabbed his CB radio. "Any trucks on the Yellowknife ice road? This is Vincent in the blue Peterbilt. You got your ears on?" Static. He tried his satellite phone. No signal, even though he'd had 5 bars 10 minutes ago. His dash cam was recording, the timestamp in the corner reading 9:48 a.m., 9:49 a.m., 9:50 a.m. But he kept passing the same red flag. The landscape beyond the road began to change, subtly at first. The distant tree line seemed slightly different each time he passed the flag, trees in slightly different positions, as if reality was being redrawn each loop. The ice beneath his wheels remained solid, the sound of his tires unchanged. But Vincent's instruments were going insane. His fuel gauge dropped, then jumped back up. His temperature gauge fluctuated wildly. The clock on his dash began running backward, then forward, then stopped entirely. Vincent tried stopping. He brought the truck to a complete halt at what should have been kilometer 187.8. He sat there, engine idling, watching his GPS. It flickered between 187.2 and 187.8, unable to decide where he was. When he started driving again, he was back at the red flag. 187.2 kilometers. Panic clawed at his chest. Vincent floored the accelerator, pushing his truck to 100 kilometers per hour, dangerous speed on ice. The flag approached. He passed it. And there it was again, ahead of him. He tried driving backward, putting the truck in reverse. The flag appeared behind him. He was stuck in an impossible loop of road that shouldn't exist. Then Vincent noticed something that made his blood freeze. His trailer. In his side mirror, he could see his trailer, but it looked wrong. The company logo was backward. Not mirror reversed backward, but actually backward, as if he was looking at his truck from outside reality. He grabbed his logbook with shaking hands. The text he'd written was backward. Everything was backward. Or he was backward. Or reality was folding in on itself. The red flag ahead began to multiply. 2 flags, 4 flags, 8 flags, 16. The road ahead became lined with infinite red flags, each one marking the same position. 187.2 kilometers. Vincent's radio erupted with his own voice, calling for help. The words he'd spoken minutes ago playing back to him in a loop. Then between one heartbeat and the next, it ended. Vincent's GPS jumped to 188.3 kilometers. The 3-tree island appeared on his right, exactly where it should be. His instruments stabilized. The clock read 9:51 a.m. According to the time, he'd been in the loop for 4 minutes. According to his memory, it had been at least 30. Vincent completed his delivery. He said nothing to anyone. But when he reviewed his dashcam footage later, it showed something impossible. 4 minutes of footage were missing, cut cleanly from the recording. His GPS log showed a gap. At 9:47 a.m., he was at kilometer 187.2. At 9:51 a.m., he was at 188.3. The kilometer in between simply didn't exist in any of his records, except his handwritten logbook. When Vincent examined it closely, he found entries he didn't remember writing. The same sentence, written 37 times in his own handwriting. I am stuck at 187.2. If you are reading this, don't stop at the red flag. Vincent Kowalski still drives the ice road, but he removed all the red flags at kilometer 187 himself, replacing them with yellow ones. Other drivers have reported that sometimes late at night they still see a red flag there, and some have reported losing time passing that exact spot. Story 2. The Caller. Gerald Hutchins answered his cell phone at 11:34 p.m. on November 8, 2018, while driving his Freightliner Cascadia south on the Alaska Highway through British Columbia. He was hauling automotive parts from Fairbanks to Prince George, a route he'd driven monthly for 9 years. The caller ID showed his own phone number. Gerald stared at the screen. His own number was calling him. Curiosity overrode caution, and he answered. Hello? A voice identical to his own spoke. Gerald, listen carefully. In 4 kilometers there will be a moose on the road. You're going to swerve right. Don't. Hit it. The line went dead. Gerald's hands tightened on the wheel. Someone was pranking him, had to be. Spoofing phone numbers was easy. But the voice had been perfect, not just similar but identical, matching his own accent, his own cadence, even the slight rasp he had from years of smoking. He checked his speedometer, 90 kilometers per hour. He slowed to 80, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond his headlights. At exactly 4 kilometers by his odometer, a massive bull moose stepped onto the highway. Gerald's instinct was to swerve right, exactly as his caller had predicted. Instead, he slammed his brakes and gripped the wheel straight. The truck shuddered, tires screaming. The moose turned its head, eyes reflecting in the high beams, then calmly walked off the road. Gerald's truck stopped 20 meters short of where the animal had stood. His phone rang again, his own number. His hands shaking, Gerald answered. His own voice spoke, but this time it sounded distressed, breathing hard. Okay, good. You listened. In 18 kilometers, your left front tire will blow. When it does, don't overcorrect. Ride it out straight. This is important, Gerald. Straight. Click. This wasn't a prank. This was something else. Gerald pulled over, his emergency flashers cutting orange paths through the darkness. He grabbed his flashlight and inspected his tires. The left front looked fine. Good tread, proper inflation, no visible damage. He climbed back in the cab, his mind racing through possibilities. Someone was watching him, had to be. But the Alaska highway was deserted. He hadn't seen another vehicle in an hour. He drove, counting kilometers. 15, 16, 17. At 18.3 kilometers, his left front tire exploded. The truck lurched violently left. Every instinct screamed to correct right. Gerald forced himself to hold the wheel steady, letting the truck slow naturally. It took 200 meters, but he brought the vehicle to a controlled stop on the shoulder. The phone rang before he could unbuckle his seatbelt. "You're doing well, Gerald. I need you to keep driving on the spare. Do not stop at the Toad River Lodge in 47 kilometers. Drive past it. I know you're scheduled to stop there. Don't. Keep going to Fort Nelson. This is critical." The voice, his voice, sounded exhausted, almost pleading. Gerald changed the tire, his movements automatic while his mind churned. Toad River Lodge was his planned fuel stop. His GPS showed he had enough diesel to reach Fort Nelson, barely. But why? What was at Toad River that his future self was warning him about? He drove past the lodge at 1:15 a.m. The lights were on, several trucks parked in the lot. It looked normal, inviting even. Gerald's fuel gauge nudged toward empty. His phone remained silent. He reached Fort Nelson at 2:43 a.m., his fuel tank nearly dry, and pulled into the Petro-Canada station. While fueling, he checked local news on his phone. His blood went cold. Breaking, multiple fatalities at Toad River Lodge. Gas leak explosion at approximately 1:30 a.m. 3 confirmed dead, several injured. Investigation ongoing. The explosion had occurred 15 minutes after he would have been there, parked, refueling, possibly inside the building. The phone rang. His number. This time, when he answered, there was only breathing, heavy, pained breathing. "Gerald," his own voice whispered, barely audible. "This is where it gets difficult. I couldn't save them all. I could only save you. Listen carefully to every call. Some things I can change, some things I can't. But I'm trying. God, I'm trying." "Who are you?" Gerald demanded. "What are you?" The breathing continued for a moment. "I'm you. 3 days from now. Or I was. Time isn't linear anymore. Not after what happens at kilometer 1247. I'm calling back, trying to change it. But every change creates new problems. The moose, the tire, the explosion, these I can predict. But there's something else coming. Something I can't see clearly. I need you to..." Static consumed the line. Gerald didn't receive another call for 60 kilometers. When it came, his own voice was different, frantic. "Gerald, don't answer the next call. I'm not alone anymore. Something else is using the line. Something that sounds like me but isn't. It's going to tell you to take the old Stewart-Cassiar highway detour. Don't listen. Stay on the Alaska..." The call cut off. 2 minutes later, the phone rang. His number. Gerald stared at it, his heart pounding. He answered. His own voice spoke, calm, measured. "Gerald, you need to take the Stewart-Cassiar detour at the junction ahead. Construction has closed the main highway. The detour will save you 3 hours." Something about the voice was wrong. The words were right, the tone was right, but there was an emptiness beneath it, like someone doing a perfect impression without understanding the meaning. "Who are you?" Gerald asked. Silence stretched for 5 seconds. "I'm you, Gerald. Take the detour." The line went dead. Gerald reached the junction. A legitimate construction sign indicated the main highway was down to 1 lane. Delays expected. No closure, no detour necessary. His phone rang continuously for the next hour. He didn't answer. Each call went to voicemail. He listened to them later. His own voice. Dozens of variations, some pleading, some threatening, some sobbing, some laughing. All claiming to be him. All giving different instructions. At kilometer 1247, exactly where his future self had mentioned, Gerald saw something in the road. A phone booth. An old-style phone booth standing impossibly in the middle of the highway, miles from any building or power line. The phone inside was ringing. Gerald could hear it even through his closed windows and over his engine noise. He drove past it. In his rearview mirror, he watched the phone booth fade, but not with distance. It became transparent, then simply ceased to exist, as if reality had decided it was never there. His cell phone rang one final time. This time, the caller ID was different. It showed a date. November 11th, 2018. 3 days in the future. Gerald answered. His own voice spoke, but it sounded older, tired, marked by something profound. You made it past the booth, that's good. That means I made it past too. I don't know what it was, Gerald. I don't know what was calling us, but it's over now. You won't hear from me again. Just know that somewhere in some timeline you saved yourself. We saved ourselves. What happens on November 11th? Gerald asked. Why that date? A long pause. That's the day I picked up the phone in the booth, in the original timeline. The day everything changed. But you drove past it, so maybe it never happens now. Maybe time fixed itself, or maybe I'm still in that booth and this is all just echoes. I don't know anymore. Just keep driving, Gerald. And if you ever see a phone booth in the middle of nowhere, don't stop. Whatever's on the other end isn't making a call, it's already answered. The line went dead. Gerald's phone never showed another call from his own number. But sometimes, late at night on empty highways, it will ring with no caller ID at all. He never answers those calls, and he makes his wife promise, made his children promise, that if they ever see a phone booth standing alone far from where phone booths should be, they drive past, without stopping. Story 3. The Wait. Denise Pritchard picked up her cargo manifest at the port of Churchill on Hudson Bay, Manitoba, on August 22, 2020. The paperwork listed 15 pallets of machine parts destined for Thompson, 420 kilometers south. Weight, 18,000 kilograms. Denise had been hauling freight on northern routes for 14 years, and she knew her international LT series truck could handle the load easily. She'd moved heavier cargo on worse roads. The weigh station at the port confirmed her loaded weight, 36,800 kilograms total, including the truck and trailer. Denise signed the paperwork, secured her load with regulation straps, and departed at 3:00 p.m. The route south on Highway 6 was gravel and rough, but dry. Good conditions for August. 50 kilometers south of Churchill, Denise felt the truck handle differently, heavier. She checked her mirrors, worried a strap had loosened or cargo had shifted. Everything looked secure, but the truck was definitely pulling harder. Her fuel consumption increased. She dropped from 9th gear to 8th, then 7th. The engine strained as if she was hauling double the weight up a steep grade, but the terrain was flat. At kilometer 94, Denise stopped at a pullout to inspect her load. Every strap was tight. Every pallet was exactly where it should be. She walked around her trailer, checking for damage, finding nothing. Yet when she climbed back in the cab and resumed driving, the truck felt even heavier. She was down to 6th gear on flat ground. Her CB radio crackled. Northbound International, you hauling okay? You're moving pretty slow. A southbound driver passing her. Denise grabbed the radio. Yeah, I'm heavy today. Load feels wrong, but everything checks out. The other driver's voice came back, puzzled. Heavy? Your trailer looks empty from here. You sure you got cargo back there? Denise pulled over again. She walked to the trailer doors and opened them. 15 pallets of machine parts exactly as loaded. She photographed them with her phone, needing evidence of her own sanity. When she reached to touch the nearest pallet, her hand passed through it. She staggered backward, her mind refusing to process what she'd seen. She reached again. Solid. The pallet was solid. Her hand didn't pass through. She slammed the doors and drove. The weight continued increasing. By kilometer 150, she was in 5th gear. Her temperature gauge climbed toward the red. Her fuel consumption had tripled. The truck was using diesel as if hauling 60,000 kilograms, not 18,000. Denise stopped at Gull Rapids, the only fuel station between Churchill and Thompson. The attendant, an elderly man named Robert, looked at her truck with concern. "You okay, miss? Your trailer's sitting awful low." Denise walked to the rear of her trailer. The suspension was compressed nearly to the stops, as if under enormous weight. "I need to use your scale," she told Robert. "I think something's wrong with my load." The station had an old mechanical scale, the kind that used counterweights. Denise pulled her truck onto it. Robert adjusted the weights, his expression growing confused, then alarmed. "Ma'am, according to this, you're weighing 61,000 kilograms. That's not possible. Your truck would be overloaded by 20,000 kilos. You'd have permits for that, special axles, escorts." "I loaded at 36,800, Denise said, her voice hollow. 6 hours ago, I've been driving straight. Nothing was added." Robert checked the scale mechanism. "Scale's accurate. I calibrated it last week. You're hauling 61,000 kilos of something." Denise opened the trailer again. 15 pallets. She counted them twice. She took a pallet jack and attempted to move one. It wouldn't budge. These pallets, which the manifest said weighed 200 kilograms each, were impossibly heavy. She put her full weight against the pallet jack. The pallet didn't move a millimeter. "What's in those boxes?" Robert asked, peering into the trailer. Denise checked her manifest. Machine parts, brass fittings, steel housings, nothing exotic. Robert climbed into the trailer with her. He tapped one of the boxes. It sounded hollow. He pulled out a pocket knife and cut the strapping on one box. Inside were brass fittings exactly as described. He picked one up. "This weighs maybe 300 grams, he said. "Nothing unusual." But the pallet wouldn't move. The trailer groaned under weight that shouldn't exist. Denise's phone rang. The number was from Transport Manitoba, the department that issued freight permits. She answered. A woman's voice spoke. "Ms. Pritchard, this is Janet Kuhlman with Transport Manitoba. We need you to return to Churchill immediately. There's been an error with your cargo manifest." "What kind of error?" Denise asked. A long pause. "The machine parts you picked up. They were loaded on the wrong truck. Your truck was supposed to be empty. Those pallets should have gone to a specialized heavy haul carrier." Denise looked at her manifest. "This paperwork says 18,000 kilograms. I was weighed at Churchill. Everything was legitimate." "Ms. Pritchard, please listen carefully. The boxes in your trailer contain machine parts, yes. But those parts were manufactured from materials recovered from a mining accident in 2003. 17 miners were killed when a shaft collapsed. Their bodies were never recovered. The ore they were mining was salvaged and processed. Some of it was manufactured into the parts you're carrying." Denise felt ice in her stomach. "What does that have to do with weight?" Janet's voice dropped. "We don't know. But every truck that's hauled those specific parts has reported the same problem. Progressive weight gain. By the time they reach their destination, the cargo weighs 3 to 4 times the original load. We thought we'd track down all the affected material. Your load should have been flagged." "What happens when it gets too heavy?" Denise asked. Silence. "Ms. Pritchard, we've had 3 trucks collapse their own axles. One went through a bridge. We need you to stop driving and wait for a specialized crew. Do not continue south. "Do not attempt to deliver this cargo." Denise hung up. She looked at Robert. "I need to unload this trailer now." Together they tried. The pallets wouldn't move. They attempted to drag individual boxes off the pallets. The boxes wouldn't budge. They were fused to the pallets, or the pallets were fused to the trailer floor, or reality itself was refusing to let them separate this cargo. The truck's suspension groaned, metal fatiguing under impossible stress. Denise made a decision. She uncoupled her trailer, leaving it at Gull Rapids. The truck felt light again, normal. She drove south on the tractor alone, leaving 61,000 kilograms of cargo that should have weighed 18,000, leaving 15 pallets of machine parts that couldn't be moved. Transport Manitoba arrived the next day with specialized equipment. According to the report Denise received weeks later, the trailer and cargo were loaded onto a heavy-haul flatbed and transported to a secure facility. The final weight at the facility was 103,000 kilograms. The cargo had gained another 42,000 kilograms overnight, sitting stationary in an empty parking lot. Denise requested the manifest details. The parts were indeed manufactured from ore mined in 2003. The accident occurred on August 22nd, exactly 17 years before Denise picked up the load. 17 miners died. The cargo gained roughly 42,000 kilograms, about 2,470 kilograms per miner. The average weight of a human body. She never hauled from Churchill again, but she dreams about it sometimes. Dreams where she's still driving that trailer south, feeling the weight increase kilometer by kilometer, feeling the truck sink lower and lower until the wheels break through the highway, sinking into earth that shouldn't exist, descending into collapsed mine shafts that are somehow beneath a road hundreds of kilometers from any mine, descending towards 17 shadows that reach upward, wanting their weight returned, wanting to be carried home. Story number 4, The Backwards Town. Marcus Chen had been hauling lumber across the Yukon for 18 years, and he knew every truck stop between Whitehorse and Inuvik like the back of his hand. On December 4th, 2019, he was making his usual run down the Dempster Highway when his fuel gauge dropped faster than it should have. Around 2 a.m., he spotted lights in the distance where no town should exist. The sign read, "Welcome to Ashford," but Marcus had never heard of it. The streets were clean, well lit, and completely deserted. He pulled into a gas station that looked brand new, its pumps gleaming under fluorescent lights. An attendant emerged, dressed in a uniform from the 1950s with slicked back hair and a peculiar smile. "Fill her up?" the man asked, his voice oddly flat. Marcus nodded, stepping out to stretch. That's when he noticed something profoundly wrong. Every single car parked along the main street faced the wrong direction, backed into spaces as if everyone had arrived in reverse. The diner across the street had its letters backwards on the window. Even the clock on the town hall was running counterclockwise, its hands moving steadily against time itself. The attendant worked slowly, methodically, never blinking. Marcus walked toward the diner, pushing the door open. Inside, a waitress stood motionless behind the counter, her back to him. Coffee poured upward from cups back into a pot she held, defying gravity and logic. A jukebox in the corner played music that sounded normal until Marcus realized the lyrics were reversed, words ending before they began, sentences completing themselves backwards. He backed out slowly, heart hammering, returning to his truck. The attendant handed him a receipt dated December 4th, 1959, exactly 60 years prior. The paper felt authentic, aged, yellowed at the edges. Marcus paid in cash, hands shaking, and drove off without waiting for change. In his mirror, the town's lights blinked out one by one as if someone was switching them off in sequence, darkness consuming the impossible place. He checked his GPS. It showed him in the middle of wilderness, no roads, no towns for 80 miles in any direction. His fuel gauge read full, but when he checked his receipt in the morning light at a real truck stop, The paper had aged to extreme brittleness, crumbling between his fingers like ancient parchment. Marcus reported the location to authorities, providing exact coordinates, but satellite imagery showed only empty tundra. No structures, no roads, nothing but frozen wasteland. He never took that route again, but sometimes, on December 4th each year, he swears he can see those lights in his peripheral vision, always backwards, always wrong, always waiting. Other drivers have reported similar experiences on the Dempster Highway, always on December 4th, always around 2 a.m., always finding a town that runs in reverse. Some say it's a town that exists in negative time, a place where everything flows backward towards some catastrophic event it's trying to prevent or perpetuate. Marcus doesn't know and doesn't want to know. He's marked that stretch of highway in red on all his maps, a warning to himself and others. Some places aren't meant to be found, and some towns are trapped in directions human minds weren't designed to comprehend. Story: The Passenger Seat. Elena Rodriguez specialized in overnight hauls across the Alaska Highway, preferring the solitude of 3 a.m. roads to daytime traffic. On March 17, 2021, she picked up a refrigerated load in Fort Nelson, British Columbia, bound for Fairbanks. Her truck was new, a 2021 Kenworth equipped with all the latest safety features, including a passenger seat sensor that indicated weight and occupancy. 2 hours into her drive, cruising through darkness and light snow, the sensor light activated. The digital display showed 167 pounds in the passenger seat. Elena glanced over at the empty seat, then back at the dashboard. The light stayed on, unwavering. She pulled over onto the shoulder, inspecting the seat thoroughly, running her hands across the cushion, finding absolutely nothing. The moment she sat back down and shifted into gear, she felt the truck tilt slightly right, as if someone had just climbed in beside her. The temperature inside the cab dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Her breath misted in the air despite the heater running full blast, warm air pouring from the vents. Then the seatbelt clicked. Elena watched in frozen horror as the passenger seatbelt slowly extracted itself, crossed the empty seat with deliberate motion, and locked into place. The shoulder strap was taut, pressed down as if restraining someone invisible, the fabric creasing under unseen weight. Her CB radio crackled with static, then a voice emerged, whispering her full name, her home address in Anchorage, the names of her 2 children, Sophia and Miguel. The voice knew things nobody should know. Intimate details about her childhood in Guadalajara, secrets she'd never told anyone. It asked her questions in a voice that sounded exactly like her dead father, who'd passed away 3 years earlier. It knew about the accident she'd caused at 16, the one she'd never reported, the one where someone had died in a ditch while she drove away in panic. The passenger side window began to fog up from the inside. A handprint appeared, then another, small child-sized prints pressing against the glass from within the cab. Elena couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She pulled over again, throwing open her door, but something grabbed her arm with invisible fingers, ice cold and impossibly strong, gripping with desperate intensity. She ripped free, falling into the snow, her jacket tearing. The truck's interior light illuminated the cab, and she saw the impression, clear as day, of someone sitting in that seat, the cushion compressed deeply. The headrest tilted back, even the armrest pushed down. She ran to an emergency call box a quarter-mile back, stumbling through knee-deep snow, and when the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived 3 hours later, they found her truck still running, passenger door wide open, seatbelt still fastened across the empty seat. The seat sensor still registered 167 pounds. They called a mechanic, then another, then a technician from Kenworth itself. Nobody could explain the malfunction. The sensor was functioning perfectly, responding accurately to calibrated weights, but it continued to show 167 pounds on the passenger seat even when completely empty. Elena never drove again. The truck was sold at auction, and 3 subsequent owners have reported the exact same phenomenon. Always at night, always on the Alaska Highway between Fort Nelson and Whitehorse, always showing exactly 167 pounds. The last owner researched the number and discovered that in 2003, a woman named Jennifer Morrison disappeared on that exact stretch of highway. She was last seen hitchhiking near Fort Nelson. She weighed 167 pounds. Her body was never found, but her jacket was discovered miles down the road, torn and bloody, as if she'd tried to escape from something. Now she rides with drivers who travel her last route, forever trying to get home, forever trapped in that passenger seat, growing colder and more desperate with each passing year. Story: The Loop. David Kowalski was hauling electronics from Winnipeg to Yellowknife on October 23, 2018, running behind schedule due to weather delays. Around midnight, he entered a stretch of Highway 3 he'd traveled hundreds of times before, a straight section through dense forest. The road was empty, snow falling in thick curtains that his headlights barely penetrated. He passed a distinctive landmark, an abandoned gas station with a collapsed roof and a faded Pete's Auto sign hanging at an angle. 10 minutes later, he passed it again. Same collapsed roof, same sign, same angle, same pattern of snow accumulation. David checked his GPS, which showed him progressing normally northward, the blue dot moving steadily along the route. He kept driving, watching his odometer climb, but 15 minutes later, there was Pete's Auto again. Identical to before, even down to the position of snowdrifts around the building and a piece of corrugated metal that had blown against the fence. His fuel gauge hadn't moved. The clock on his dashboard showed 12:47 a.m., but his phone showed 12:32 a.m., a discrepancy that shouldn't exist. He tried his CB radio, calling out for any nearby truckers. A voice responded immediately, crackling through static. "You need to stop passing me." David's blood ran cold. He was alone on this road, hadn't seen another vehicle in hours. He accelerated, pushing his rig to 70 miles per hour, desperate to break whatever was happening. Pete's Auto appeared again and again. Each time his GPS showed progress, the mile markers advancing. Each time his odometer continued its steady climb. But that building kept appearing every 10 to 15 minutes, unchanging. Impossible, a fixed point in a reality that had broken. On the 8th loop, he saw another truck parked beside the abandoned station, its lights on, exhaust puffing white into the cold air. David pulled over, relief flooding through him. He approached the other truck, boots crunching in fresh snow, and knocked on the driver's side door. When it opened, he was staring at himself. Same face, same jacket, same company logo, same expression of absolute terror mirrored in his own features. The other David pointed behind him with a shaking hand, where a third truck was pulling up. Another version of himself climbed out, then another and another and another. 7 identical trucks, 7 identical drivers, all trapped in the same loop, all arriving at different times or perhaps the same time repeated infinitely. The first David, the one who'd been there longest, was gaunt, aged years in what should have been hours, his uniform tattered and stained. "I've been here for weeks," he whispered, voice raw. "We all have. We keep arriving, but we never leave. You're the newest. Eventually you'll be the oldest, and then..." He pointed to the far end of the lot where a truck sat dark and silent, driver's door hanging open, seat empty, snow piled inside the cab. David ran back to his truck, drove in reverse, tires screaming, transmission protesting. He backed up for 3 hours straight, never taking his foot off the gas, ignoring the grinding sounds until the sun rose and the road suddenly became familiar again, the loop breaking as mysteriously as it had begun. When he checked his dash cam footage later, it showed him passing Pete's Auto 36 times. His truck had aged dramatically, rust appearing overnight where there had been none. tires worn nearly smooth, paint oxidized. David sold his rig the next day, but he still has nightmares about that abandoned gas station, wondering how many versions of himself are still driving that loop, trapped in an endless October midnight, each one aging and deteriorating until they become the empty truck at the end of the lot, the final destination for drivers who can't escape the road that repeats forever. Story truths. The thing in the trailer. Jack Morrison was hauling a sealed freight container from Anchorage to Dawson Creek on January 9, 2020. The manifest listed mechanical parts, and he'd been explicitly instructed not to open the container under any circumstances. Standard protocol for valuable or sensitive cargo, nothing unusual. He'd made this run 1,000 times and never gave it a second thought until somewhere past Fort St. John, when the screaming started. It came from inside the trailer, muffled by thick metal walls but unmistakable, a human voice shrieking in agony and terror. Jack pulled over immediately, grabbing his flashlight and circling the trailer in the freezing night. The container was sealed exactly as it had been at loading, the lock intact, the customs tape unbroken. But the screaming continued, rising and falling in waves of pure horror. The sound of someone experiencing unimaginable suffering. He called his dispatcher, who seemed unsurprised and insisted the cargo was legitimate, authorized, and that he should continue driving without stopping again. The screaming stopped abruptly. Silence filled the night, so complete Jack could hear his own heartbeat. Then came the scratching, metal on metal, something dragging claws or knives across the interior walls of the container. Jack could hear it moving, pacing the length of the 40-foot trailer, back and forth, back and forth. His truck began rocking slightly with each pass, as if something massive was throwing its weight around inside, despite the manifest claiming only small mechanical components. He climbed into his cab and drove, but the sounds intensified with every mile. Whatever was in there was getting more aggressive, the impacts harder, the scratching deeper and more frantic. His trailer began to shudder violently, swaying on the road. Through his side mirror, he watched in disbelief as the container walls bulged outward, as if something was pressing against them from inside. With enormous force, the thick steel actually deforming. At a weigh station, inspectors found nothing wrong. The seal was intact, unbroken. The manifest was legitimate, properly documented. They opened the container despite Jack's protests, and inside were mechanical parts exactly as listed, neatly packed and secured with proper documentation. Nothing that could have made noise, nothing that could have moved, nothing alive. But the interior walls were covered in deep scratches, fresh gouges in the metal that exposed bright steel underneath. Scratches that hadn't been there when the container was loaded 12 hours earlier. Jack refused to continue the haul, walking off the job despite threats and consequences. Another driver took over and made the delivery without incident, reporting nothing unusual. But Jack's dash cam told a different story when he reviewed it with a lawyer. The audio captured everything perfectly, the screams, the scratching, the impacts. Sounds that analysis confirmed were real, not mechanical interference. The screams were human, but the language wasn't. Syllables that didn't match any known dialect, frequencies that shouldn't come from human vocal cords, harmonics that suggested multiple voices screaming in perfect synchronization. The shipping company denied everything, sealed the records, threatened legal action if Jack spoke publicly about the incident. He took early retirement at 43, but the nightmares never stopped. In them, he opens that container and sees something that shouldn't exist. Something that was screaming because it was being transported somewhere it didn't want to go. Something that knew his name and whispered it in that impossible language, promising that one day he'd be cargo too, sealed in darkness, screaming for help that would never come, transported to destinations that don't exist on any map, delivered to customers who aren't human. Story Mon, the radio station. Patricia Moore was driving a night run across Saskatchewan on August 15, 2017, when her radio picked up a station that shouldn't exist. She was scanning for weather updates when she hit a frequency, 88.1 FM, broadcasting crystal clear despite being in the middle of nowhere, hours from any town. A smooth voice announced, "You're listening to WNTH Northern Highway Radio, broadcasting live from the Road Eternal." The voice began reading news, but the stories were wrong, impossibly wrong. It reported accidents that hadn't happened yet, describing them in past tense with specific details. It gave weather patterns 3 days in advance with perfect accuracy. And worst of all, it described Patricia's exact location, her truck's make and model, her cargo of agricultural equipment. Patricia Moore heading eastbound on Highway 16, mile marker 437, carrying John Deere tractors, the voice said pleasantly, as if reading a casual traffic report. "Patricia, you should slow down. There's something in the road ahead." She did slow down, instinct overriding skepticism, and 1 mile later, a massive elk stepped onto the highway directly into her path. If she'd been going her normal speed, she would have hit it at 70 miles per hour, potentially jackknifing her entire rig. A fatal accident. Her hands shook as she passed the animal safely. The radio continued. "Good choice, Patricia. Now let's talk about your future." The station began describing her life in detail, events that hadn't happened yet, conversations she hadn't had. It told her about her daughter's wedding next spring, describing the venue, the dress, the weather on that specific day. It mentioned her husband's cancer diagnosis in 2 years, gave the exact date of the doctor's appointment, named the oncologist who would deliver the news. It described the grandchild she'd meet in 5 years, gave the baby's name, birth weight, time of delivery. The voice was kind, almost gentle, but there was something underneath it, something cold and calculating, something that enjoyed knowing what she couldn't. "We broadcast for drivers like you," it said. "Lonely people on lonely roads, people who need to know what's coming. But information has a price, Patricia. You've been listening for 30 minutes now. That's 30 minutes of future knowledge. The payment is due." Her radio began to static violently, and through the noise she heard other voices, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all screaming in despair and agony. The pleasant announcer returned, cutting through the screams. "Those are our previous listeners. They didn't pay their debt. They're still driving, Patricia, out there on roads that never end, in trucks that never stop, listening to us forever, learning about futures they'll never experience. Would you like to join them, or would you prefer to pay?" The station cut out completely. Patricia pulled over, ripped the radio from her dashboard with her bare hands, and threw it into a ditch. When she got home 3 days later, everything the station had predicted began coming true with disturbing accuracy. Her daughter announced her engagement. Her husband's doctor called about suspicious test results requiring a follow-up. Patricia tried to warn them, but how could she explain? She'd traded pieces of her future for survival that night, and now she was living a life that felt scripted, predetermined, every moment echoing that cold voice on 88.1 FM. Other truckers report finding the station occasionally, always 88.1, always in the middle of nowhere, always accurate. Most change the channel immediately, sensing something wrong. Those who don't are never quite the same afterward. They drive more carefully, as if they know something terrible is coming, and sometimes, late at night, they tune their radios to that frequency deliberately, listening for news about futures they hope to avoid, not realizing that every minute of listening digs them deeper into a debt they can never repay. Ilam, binding them to roads that stretch beyond death itself. Story: the following lights. Thomas Blackwood noticed the headlights behind him somewhere between Watson Lake and Whitehorse on November 3, 2016, around 1 a.m. Nothing unusual at first, just another vehicle on the Alaska Highway. maintaining a steady distance of about 200 yards. But after an hour of driving through darkness and light snow, Thomas realized something impossible. The lights never changed position, never got closer or further away, matched his speed exactly whether he accelerated or slowed down. He tried speeding up to 80 miles per hour on a straight stretch. The lights maintained perfect distance. He slowed to 40, still the same gap, mathematically precise. He pulled over at a rest stop and the lights stopped too, far back in the darkness, just sitting there motionless, waiting. Thomas got out trying to see what kind of vehicle it was, but the headlights were too bright, too white, almost like spotlights or searchlights. Not normal vehicle lights at all. He got back in and drove, and immediately the lights followed, resuming that exact 200-yard gap. This continued for 3 hours, an impossible pursuit that never varied. His CB radio attempts to contact the vehicle went unanswered, just static. He called the RCMP, but no patrol cars were in the area, and the operator suggested it was probably just another trucker heading the same direction. A reasonable explanation that felt entirely wrong. At the next town, Thomas pulled into a 24-hour truck stop, parking under bright lights, surrounded by other vehicles and people. The headlights stopped at the parking lot entrance but didn't enter. Just sat there at the edge of darkness, unmoving. Thomas waited inside the truck stop diner for 2 hours, drinking coffee, watching through the window. The lights never moved, never dimmed, never turned off. Other patrons couldn't see them, insisted the entrance was empty, but Thomas saw them clearly, burning steadily in the darkness. When he finally worked up courage to leave, he asked another trucker to follow him out for safety. The man agreed, and they walked to Thomas's rig together. The lights were gone. Thomas laughed nervously, embarrassed, and climbed into his cab. His companion headed to his own truck, and the moment Thomas started his engine, the lights reappeared in his mirror exactly 200 yards back, as if they'd been waiting patiently for him to be alone again. He drove straight through to Whitehorse, 7 more hours, and the lights followed every single mile. When he finally reached the city limits at dawn, the lights stopped at a specific point on the highway, as if hitting an invisible barrier, and simply sat there as Thomas continued into town. In his mirror, he watched them shrink in the distance, perfectly still, waiting. Thomas delivered his cargo and immediately drove back south, daylight only, taking a different route. But he had to pass near that spot where the lights had stopped, and spray painted on the road in letters 10 feet tall were the words, "Turn back." The paint was fresh, still wet, dripping. It hadn't been there on his way north just hours before. City officials had no record of any roadwork or markings in that area. The paint was analyzed and came back as a compound that hadn't been manufactured since 1973. Couldn't be manufactured anymore because the chemicals were banned decades ago. Other drivers have reported the following lights on that exact stretch of highway. They always appear after dark, always maintain the same distance, and always stop at that same spot where the warning is painted. Authorities have tried to stake it out, but the lights never appear when anyone is watching intentionally, only when drivers are alone and vulnerable. Only lone drivers, only at night, only when they're not expecting it. Thomas still drives, but never that route, never at night. He's seen the footage from his dash cam, watched those lights follow him for hours, and in certain frames, if you zoom in just right and adjust the brightness, you can see there's no vehicle attached to them at all. Just 2 points of light floating 3 feet above the road, tracking their prey with patient, eternal hunger. Waiting for the driver who doesn't stop at the city limits, who keeps going into darkness, who finally lets those lights catch up and discover what's been following them all along. Story, Stinum, the empty town. Rebecca Santos pulled into CarMax, Yukon for fuel and food on February 8, 2019, around 9 p.m. She'd stopped there dozens of times before, knew the layout, knew the friendly folks who ran the gas station and diner. But when she rolled down the main street, every building was dark. Every single one. No streetlights, no house lights, no gas station signs glowing. Her headlights were the only illumination in the entire town, cutting through darkness that felt thick and oppressive. She parked at the gas station, which was unlocked but empty. The door chimed when she entered, but nobody responded. The register was open, cash still inside, bills neatly organized. Coffee pots were still warm on the burners, liquid steaming. A half-eaten sandwich sat on the counter behind the register, fresh enough that the lettuce hadn't wilted and the bread was still soft. The clock on the wall ticked normally, showing the correct time. Everything suggested people had been there minutes ago, but there was absolutely no one. Rebecca walked down the main street, calling out, her voice echoing strangely as if the buildings were hollow or the air itself was wrong. She tried doors, finding them unlocked, finding homes with TVs still on broadcasting static, dinner plates full of food on tables still warm, cars in driveways with engines still ticking as they cooled. 300 people lived in Carmax, and every single one had vanished in the time it took her to drive from the town limits to the main street, a distance of perhaps 2 minutes. She tried her phone. No signal, which was unusual because Carmax had a cell tower. Her CB radio produced only static, thick and buzzing. She returned to her truck, deciding to drive to the next town for help, but when she tried to start it, the engine wouldn't catch. It turned over but wouldn't fire. She tried 3 times, then heard it, a sound coming from every building simultaneously, a low hum that vibrated in her chest and made her teeth ache, a frequency that felt wrong on a fundamental level. The lights came on all at once, every building, every streetlight, every home, all blazing with illumination so bright it hurt. And in every window stood a figure, perfectly still, facing outward toward the street. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all identical in posture, all watching her with unnatural stillness. She couldn't see details through the glare, just silhouettes, but they were human-shaped, and they weren't moving at all, not breathing, not shifting weight, just standing. Rebecca ran to the nearest building, pounding on the door desperately. The figure in the window didn't react. She looked through the glass and saw it clearly now, a person wearing clothes from the 1940s, standing in a living room decorated from that era. Beside them stood another figure in 1800s clothing and another in modern dress, all standing together, all facing the window, eyes open but unseeing, faces expressionless. They weren't breathing, they weren't alive, but they weren't dead either, something in between, something trapped. She backed away and her truck started on the first try, as if it had never been broken. She drove out of Carmax at 90 miles per hour, not stopping until she reached Whitehorse an hour later. Police investigated immediately and found the town completely normal. People going about their business, nobody missing, nobody matching the description of the figures she'd seen. They checked her dash cam, but it showed only static for the entire time she was in Carmax. Video and audio completely corrupted. Rebecca described specific details in her report, things she couldn't have known. A blue house with a broken porch at a specific address. A car with license plate XRJ447. A store with a sign spelled Barnes Grocer with the S backwards. When authorities checked, every detail was accurate, but these were things that hadn't existed in years. The blue house had been demolished in 1998. The car had been scrapped in 2003. The misspelled sign had been corrected in 1987. Whatever Rebecca drove through that night wasn't the current Carmax. It was something else, some collection of the town's past and present overlapping. All the people who'd ever lived there standing together in temporal confusion, all frozen, all watching. She reported seeing the same town 3 more times in the following year, always at night, always appearing suddenly where Carmax should be, always full of those watching figures. Now she takes different routes, avoiding that section of highway entirely because she knows that one day If she stops there again, she might not be able to leave. She might become one of the figures in the windows, watching the next driver who makes the mistake of stopping in a town that exists in too many times at once. A place where every era bleeds together, and nothing can truly leave. Story starts The Knocking. Vincent Torres was hauling frozen goods from Edmonton to Inuvik on September 12, 2015, running a refrigerated trailer that kept its cargo at 20 below zero Celsius. Somewhere past Enterprise, Northwest Territories, around 2 a.m., he heard knocking. Not from the engine, not from the cab, but from inside the trailer, rhythmic and persistent. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock, knock. The pattern repeated with mechanical precision. He pulled over immediately, checking the trailer seals in the freezing night air. Everything was intact, untampered. The refrigeration unit was working perfectly, maintaining temperature. He opened the back doors with numb fingers and cold air rolled out like fog. But the cargo was untouched, pallets of frozen vegetables and packaged meat, everything secured exactly as it should be, nothing out of place. The knocking stopped the moment he opened the doors, as if whatever was making the sound was waiting, listening. Vincent closed up and continued driving. 5 minutes later, the knocking resumed. Same pattern, same rhythm coming from inside the trailer where nothing should be alive. He checked his temperature gauges obsessively. 22 below zero. Nothing could survive in there. Nothing human anyway. But the knocking continued, growing more insistent, louder, as if whatever was making the sound was moving toward the front of the trailer, toward the cab, getting closer with each repetition. He tried his CB radio, contacted another trucker 20 miles ahead, desperate to talk to someone. "You hauling anything unusual?" the other driver asked, voice crackling through static. Vincent said no, just frozen goods, standard cargo. The driver went quiet for a long moment, then said, "Listen, this is going to sound crazy, but 3 years ago a driver disappeared on that exact route. They found his truck a week later, found his trailer, everything intact and running. But they found his body in the back, frozen solid, and based on the evidence, forensic analysis, he'd been alive in there for hours trying to get out, knocking and scratching until hypothermia took him." "You absolutely sure your cargo is what they told you it was?" Vincent pulled over again, hands shaking violently. He opened the trailer doors, and this time he looked carefully at the pallets, really looked. In the back corner, behind boxes of frozen vegetables, was something covered with a tarp. Something not on his manifest. He pulled the tarp back with shaking hands and found a body, frozen solid, a man in a driver's uniform identical to his own. One hand raised as if knocking, mouth open in a silent scream, eyes wide with terror. He called police immediately, voice breaking. They arrived within an hour, but when they opened the trailer with Vincent watching, the body was gone. The tarp was there, the pallets were disturbed exactly as Vincent had described, impressions in the frost where something heavy had been, but no body. The temperature log showed the trailer had been opened twice in the night, exactly when Vincent said he'd checked it, confirming his story. The other driver he'd spoken to on CB confirmed the conversation, confirmed the story about the disappeared driver 3 years ago. But officially, nothing was found. Vincent was told he'd been hallucinating, that the stress of night driving and isolation had gotten to him, that he should take time off. Except his trailer's interior walls told a different story that investigators photographed but couldn't explain. Deep scratches covered the inside of the front panel, dozens of them, fresh gouges in the metal that went through paint and exposed bright steel. And in the frost on the walls, handprints, hundreds of handprints in different sizes, as if multiple people had been pressing against the inside, trying to get out, all freezing to death in the process, leaving their final desperate marks. Vincent's cargo was delivered, inspected thoroughly, and found completely normal. But the company retired that particular trailer immediately, sent it to a scrapyard witut explanation. Vincent requested the dash cam and interior trailer footage through a lawyer, fought for weeks to get it. The company claimed all footage had been corrupted, completely unrecoverable, which made no sense for redundant digital systems. He quit trucking entirely at 38 years old, but sometimes late at night he still hears it. That rhythmic knocking, knock, 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 pause, knock, 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 and he wonders how many bodies have been transported in refrigerated trailers, hidden behind legitimate cargo, and how many of them were still alive when the doors closed, still conscious in that freezing darkness, knocking desperately for help that would never come, eventually becoming part of an endless cycle where they knock forever, trying to warn the next driver. Story Tom, the mirror truck. Alan Foster was driving north on Highway 37 through British Columbia on May 19, 2018, when he noticed a truck approaching from the opposite direction around noon. Nothing unusual at first, just standard traffic on a clear day, until he realized the truck looked exactly like his. Same make, same model, same year, same company logo on the door, same load configuration. As they passed each other, Alan glanced at the driver out of curiosity and saw his own face looking back. Expression for expression, same sunglasses, same company cap, same beard trim. He pulled over immediately, heart pounding, and watched in his side mirror as the other truck continued south. It looked identical down to the specific dent in the left fender he'd gotten last month in a tight loading dock, the specific wear pattern on the tires that came from his habit of turning too sharp, even the mud splatter pattern on the trailer that he'd been meaning to wash off. He called his dispatcher, asked if the company had another truck matching his exact specifications. The answer was no. His was the only one with that specific configuration, custom ordered, unique in the fleet. Alan continued north, shaken but trying to rationalize it. Coincidence, maybe a very similar truck, his mind playing tricks in bright sunlight and road fatigue. Then 20 miles later, he saw it again, coming toward him from the north this time. The same truck, the same driver with his face. This time he flashed his lights frantically, tried to signal the other driver to stop, but the mirror truck just continued past at exactly the same speed Alan was traveling, as if they were synchronized. This repeated 7 more times over the next 100 miles. Each time the mirror truck approached from ahead, past him going the opposite direction, and somehow ended up in front of him again. It was impossible, completely defying basic physics and geography. There were no turnarounds, no loops, no way for the same truck to keep appearing ahead when it had just passed going the other direction. Alan started documenting it desperately, taking photos with his phone, but each picture came out blurred or distorted, as if the mirror truck existed slightly out of phase with reality. On the 8th encounter, Alan deliberately stopped his truck completely, parking on the shoulder with hazards on, and waited. The mirror truck appeared in the distance, approaching slowly, but instead of passing, it slowed down and stopped directly across from him on the opposite shoulder, perhaps 50 feet away. Alan stared at his doppelganger through both windshields, and his doppelganger stared back with an expression of profound sadness. They sat there for 5 minutes, engines idling, neither moving. Then the other driver, the one with Alan's face, raised his hand slowly and pointed behind Alan with deliberate purpose. Alan turned to look, seeing only empty highway and forest, and when he turned back, the mirror truck was gone, just vanished completely. No sound, no sight of it driving away, no dust, nothing. But in his passenger seat was a logbook, his logbook with his handwriting, except the dates were all wrong, entries from 5 years in the future, describing routes he hadn't driven yet, incidents that hadn't happened yet. The final entry, dated September 3, 2023, described an accident on Highway 37, mile marker 615, a jackknife incident involving a truck matching Alan's exact specifications. The entry ended mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted violently. Alan checked the date on his phone, did the math, and realized that was exactly 5 years from today. He drove to mile marker 615 immediately and found nothing unusual, just normal highway. But he marked it in his GPS, set multiple alerts, took photos. He changed companies 3 months later, changed routes, tried to forget about it. But as September 3rd, 2023 approached, he became increasingly anxious, taking vacation days, staying off the roads entirely, convinced something terrible was coming. On September 3rd, 2023, he was home, safe, watching TV. His phone rang at 2 p.m. It was his old dispatcher begging him to fill in for a sick driver. Emergency run, triple pay, please help us out. Against every instinct, against all logic, he agreed, as if compelled. The route was Highway 37. He didn't realize until he was already 2 hours in, already committed. At 3:47 p.m., he approached mile marker 615, and there was his mirror truck approaching from the opposite direction one final time. This time, it didn't pass. It swerved directly into his lane with sudden violence. Alan jerked the wheel hard, felt the trailer begin to slide, felt the whole rig jackknifing, then rolling. He survived, barely, spent 4 months in the hospital with severe injuries. The investigation found no evidence of another truck, no witnesses, no debris from a second vehicle. But Alan's dash cam captured everything in perfect detail. The mirror truck approaching, the collision, and in the final frame before impact, the other driver's face, his face, smiling sadly, as if apologizing for something that had to happen, something that was always going to happen. Alan never drove again. He still has the logbook, keeps it locked in a safe, and sometimes he flips through it late at night, reading about the future that came true with disturbing accuracy. The last pages are blank except for one sentence in his own handwriting that he swears he doesn't remember writing, a message that appeared sometime after the accident. Tell the next Alan to take a different road.